What's up, man? Yeah, we got the same last name. We look alike. We sound alike. And we both work in cyber. So, and at the same company. So that's super fun. We get to do this all day, every day together, man. But yeah, so we're just on here ripping about security topics. And, top of the mind for me today, I heard from a customer recently and from the Mandiant team talking about this North Korea infiltration of fake workers. I was blown away at what they're doing and really kind of we need a different approach. And so I would love your thoughts on this, brother. Like, okay, here's what's happening, right? North Korea workers are paying US residents, Mexican residents, Canadian residents, whatever, to pretend to do like a job interview. So, let's say you and I are doing a job interview, guy gets on, it's a guy, he's from the US, as far as we can tell, he's in the United States, looks like somebody lives in the United States, interview's fine, we go in to hire him, but he used a fake ID, and so from a North Korean actor. So then they get hired, join the company, they're getting paid, they're collecting a paycheck. It's going into a bank account that then's routing. It probably goes into a bank in the U.S. and then gets routed, obviously out of the country.
Yeah.
Um,
Money doesn't matter. The
yeah,
paycheck doesn't matter, I should say. That's,
well,
that's
but
nothing.
they're using it. So they're doing this at such a scale that they're actually using the money to develop nuclear weapons. So like it's a multifaceted nation state attack, right? Like they're using that money, collecting it, doing it for other things. But yeah, for the individual money, they probably don't get much.
Yeah, yeah,
North
yeah.
Korea's not very nice to their people, but
They're not in it for the paycheck, right?
that's right.
It's not where they're. It's not where they're.
Yeah. But anyway, so they're doing that in the front end, right? So they're faking the identities, getting the jobs, and then as soon as they get the job, they go. They'll plant viruses, malware. They'll steal data, take proprietary information, keep the proprietary IP somewhere, and then do a ransomware attack. So they'll launch a ransomware attack at some point along the way, or just keep exfiltrating data. So they're doing a number of different things. But then if they do a ransomware attack, if you don't pay, they'll leak your intellectual property out to the world. So they kind of have this 1-2 punch for like, hey, you either pay us or we're going to leak all your sensitive data to the world, right? And so they're doing that and just kind of holding folks hostage. So anyway, they were describing what was happening and the scale at which this was happening too, like the number of companies that have been infiltrated, just mind blowing numbers. And you think, oh wow, this is a very interesting threat because there's a lot to do in order to fix this. So my mind immediately went to like, well, how do you validate the identity of someone that you're interviewing? And of course, the surest way to do that would be to go meet them in person,
Yeah,
and then have them show you their identity and then do an ID verification with like, I don't know, ID me or background check or someone like, I don't know who all the companies are that are out there, but I know there's a bunch of them that will do identity validation. When I checked into MGM in Vegas, right, they use ID.me. So you got to upload your license and do all this stuff to validate it's really you. And so I
yeah,
know there's ways to do that. So you would want a third party to do that, not trust that like, Rocky's smart enough to notice that that's a fake ID, right? So
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we just breezed through like I don't know 4 different things. We just talked about like identity, which is huge. That's a huge topic in and of itself.
yeah.
We talked insider threat. We talked ransomware. Right. We just covered a whole bunch of things. So
And that's why this was such an amazing thing. As I'm hearing like what's going on, I was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, these are all things that we have to talk about. And as a cyber practitioners, we have to be thinking about how do we protect against these things. And yeah, it's not just, this isn't a like, oh, just do ID checks and you're good to go, right? This will solve this problem. Like that's only one step that they could probably get through that sometimes, right? And then how do you do that? And even just doing that, so John, you just listed out a whole bunch of topics. So, I mean, there's so much to hit on. So just do that again, like hit all those topics again. And then let's just like start ripping through that, because I think that's the important part of this is what do we do in the face of a threat like this?
yeah, yeah. I think it's the standard security answer, right? Layers of security. There's not one silver bullet, one thing that cures all, or that you can just do and it'll magically fix all of this. So yeah, I think on the front end, or the identity piece, and understanding who you're talking to, obviously, yeah, the best way to combat that would be in person, at least one time meeting somebody in real life.
Yeah.
Side note, I did have this happen to me, not from North Korea, but somebody that I interviewed. I'm pretty sure it was their cousin or maybe brother or someone
Nice.
that did the interview, and it was not the same person that applied. So
Mm.
I have some experience with this. I don't think it was malicious in that case. I think it was just a little bit of like resume fudging happening there. That was a remote interview, and so for me, that's kind of my closest example that I can think of, where everything was remote. We never met them in person, and so they tried kind of a bait and switch type of thing. So yeah, meeting in person for sure. Love the idea of using the identity verifications. Yeah, ID me is a great one. Any other way that you can identify it. There's some really interesting stuff happening. So in the background check space around like a blockchain and using that
Yeah.
to identify individuals. So that's a really cool, interesting topic. So there's a
Yeah.
whole bunch of stuff there that actually I think would be cool to cover maybe in a later episode. But how do you really like identity is becoming a huge problem and there's not really a good solution to it. So, in the US, we have but social security number, and we all know how much of a problem that can be, right? Really difficult if that gets out to change it, right? It's this whole problem. So the identity system that we use, even your driver's license and scanning that, right, is becoming outdated very, very
Yeah.
quickly and becoming easily compromised and bypassed, right? You can upload somebody else's license into ID Me, right? Now they do want a picture of your face as well, and like a
Yep.
real use your camera, scan your face, so that's good. But so yeah, there's a whole problem of identity, and we can dig
Yeah.
into that later. And then the insider threat portion is a really interesting one. A lot of juiciness in there, with talking about you have somebody that's now inside of your company, right? They have access to things. You think that they are a legitimate business user, and maybe some of the things that they're doing are legitimate, right? They've
Yeah.
got to at least do something to make it look good and keep their access. But the insider threat is a huge soft spot for a lot of organizations. So really understanding, what your users do, most of the security tools and training and whatnot that companies use now are really
Yeah.
still focused on the external threat as much as we like to talk about insider threat. The policies around data protection and DLP are usually one of the last things that we see
Mm.
happen in a security program. So from a maturity perspective, right, most people will start with the external facing things. So like your firewalls or your basic security checks and controls. DLP comes way later in data protection. So it's a very interesting kind of soft spot right now that is being targeted and taken advantage of because it's way easier. If you're on the inside, it's a whole lot easier to find something that you shouldn't, as opposed to
Yeah.
trying to come in from the outside. Um, and use some sort of an exploit or 0 day to get in the front door and try to come in and steal some data that way. If you're already in, it's a whole lot easier to go from the inside out. Most people
Yeah.
aren't even looking for those types of threats. So yeah,
Yeah.
and then ransomware, right? We covered talking about that. That's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Being able to detect that happening, understand again data access, right? It's all about the data access. So understanding patterns in what your users are doing normally, understanding when something is abnormal and is potentially spreading rapidly. So being able to detect that happening in your environment, like, hey, this user just touched 10 million files.
Yeah.
That's not a normal thing, right? For an average person on a daily basis. If I
Yeah.
click as fast as I can, and try to open files, I might open maybe 100, but that's still not a normal user behavior. Why would I be clicking on 100
Exactly.
files, trying to open them all at once and do something with them? So
Yeah.
being able to detect that is really, really important as well.
Yeah.
That gets into your standard kind of endpoint controls, again, data security controls. So a
Yeah.
lot of it focused around the data. And then I forget what the last one was that we were talking about, but um, yeah, it hits on a lot of different things.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's exactly where my mind went as I'm listening to these guys talking about it. And we've talked about this before. I've talked about it with customers, but part of the problem is like you just take identity validation, right? So how do you do this at scale inside of an organization where you didn't do it already, right? So you've got 10,000 employees. You need to do validation of everybody's identity to make sure that's really them, that they're really an employee, that they're not a nation state actor. You kind of have to start at the CEO and then work your way down, right? Like, okay, the CEO has got to validate the identity of the other executives, and they each have to do their direct reports. Their direct reports have to do their direct reports, and on and on and on, so that everybody like validates that yes, I know this person. I did their their identity validation, and you probably need to assign like a program manager who or a security analyst or somebody who cares about doing the validation all the way through, because you can see what happens, right? Is like as you get
Yep.
down that chain and further away, and there's more and more people along the way, like somebody goes, yeah, I got on a video with them, it was good enough, like I'll just take that. Like, no, that's not acceptable. You have to go sit with them face to face, see their identity, hold it in your hand, run it through the ID process, et cetera, right? So you got to
Yeah.
have someone kind of babysitting to make sure that as that progresses down the chain, you don't lose that. I mean, that's a big process. It's going to be expensive, but I don't
Yep.
know any other way around it. Like you can't, we can't now just take for granted that the people working for us are who they say they are. Like, I mean, you mentioned a case. I'll tell my story sometime. I had this very similar thing happen where somebody pretended to be, someone else in an interview, and they were definitely related. So, guy shows up for his job, and anyway, it's a fun story. I'll tell it on another episode. But yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. That's just one element of all those other layers that you mentioned. Like, we have to take a multi-layered approach. And so I guess to wrap up for the sake of time and not just to like go
Wait.
on.
Hang on. Before we wrap up, I got. You just triggered something in
Oh,
my
do
brain.
it.
So you were talking about the identity verification piece,
Yeah.
and needing that program manager. So oddly enough, that was me. I was that guy for
Nice.
the Marines and for certificate enrollment. So for
Yeah.
the CAC cards, right? The access cards that everybody uses in
Yep.
DoD. It's that is at the root of the whole process of the security is
Yep.
that initial setup and enrollment of the token. So whether it's a PIV card or a UV key or
Yep.
whatever it is, right? The physical security keys, which are still the best anti-phishing identity
Yep.
verification method. But at some point, even at Google, right, you have to be verified as a real human, that somebody knows you, like you said. So it's funny, I was that guy, and you
Oh, you have
triggered a
firsthand
memory there.
experience. I didn't even know. Like,
Yeah, a little flashback for it. So yeah, we did the enrollment, and that's exactly what we had to do. Was everyone in the unit, or really it was the base, had to come by in person and do the enrollment process. So that initial enrollment, the very first time, the verification step was, yeah, program manager, which was me, and another guy that I worked with. We were responsible for that and making sure that people were following the procedure and doing the enrollment correctly and verifying that they were real humans. And of course, in that case, they could be physically present. But yeah, there's a whole problem now of, if what if you can't? What if you're in another country, or you're in even a different state, right?
yep.
You
Yeah.
can't come in physically, and now you've got video, right? You can authenticate
That's
me.
right.
You probably take this podcast and make a video
That's
of
right.
me that sounds just like me, and it says, "Yeah, I'm John." Like, let's go.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's a whole different challenge, right? AI. So
yeah,
now you can't trust the video. Like, you can't assume that just because the guy's on camera, that was one of the recommendations kind of along the way, and has been for the last several years, is like, make sure it's on camera during the interview. Dude, you can fake all that now. So
yep,
now you can't even trust that. Like, if you don't see this person and can touch them and see them and sit at a table with them, you cannot trust it. You have to go and see them. And I think, I got hired on during COVID, and then everything was remote, right? Video remote, interview, yeah,
yep,
cameras on, all that kind of stuff. But like, even in the face of something like that, you're gonna have to say no. You still have to come to headquarters. So organizations are just gonna have to take that cost on, of like, part of the employment cost for an employee is going to have to be flying them somewhere if you need to validate that they are who they say they are, right? You're just going to have to do that as part of that process. Otherwise, I mean, the risk is huge, right? If you don't do it, all of your data is at risk and your entire organization's at risk. And so, is it worth the $1,500 it costs to fly somebody for a day to headquarters and see them face to face? Yeah, it's worth it, right?
yeah.
Um, and then to give them the key, and then there's a whole bunch. I mean, there's just so much more that you'd have to do too. So yeah, we definitely gonna have to have some more episodes on this
Yeah,
because there's a lot of
absolutely.
layers to protection here, and then I guess just again to summarize and wrap it up. We're almost 20 minutes in, so to wrap that
Yeah, we
up,
said this was going to be short. We said this was going to
is
be
that
like,
this is short? It was short,
5 minutes.
well, you have to think about those layers, right? So come up with a strategy that includes multiple layers. I mean, all the cyber analysts who might watch this are going to be like, "Duh, we know."
Yeah.
But it's always good to just take a moment and think about this is good security practice, right? And where are we falling short in this? Because we all get busy during the day. There's stuff to fires to put out, things to do, et cetera, right? And so you kind of step back at some point and go, oh wow, yeah, I know I needed these multiple layers, and I had this layer started, and I got that layer started, but I never made progress. That layer's still very immature, et cetera, right? And so that's a whole different topic on like doing regular assessment of your strategy and your progress and all that, and just kind of keeping track. Because you can lose track during the day. And that's, again, like the program manager. Why a program manager for this? Because if as it scales out, someone's just gonna be like, yeah, whatever, I just got other things to do. And they're gonna try to breeze through the process or shortcut it. And so you need that person kind of babysitting to make sure that, yeah, this is happening and happened the right way. And so, I guess for this particular topic, probably number one on the list is do identity validation and put somebody in charge of making sure that everyone checks out. And that's going to have to start with you going to like, no joke, the CEO is going to have to validate the person that you put in charge, right? Like, okay, John, you're the program manager. You're going to have to sit down with the CEO and he's got to validate your identity first, right? And then once
Yeah.
he does that, then he or she does that, then they can turn it over to the rest of the organization and you can drive that process. But that's the other thing. Like you can't skip this step at any point along the way, right? So just think about that from a program maturity perspective. Every layer, how are we doing? What's our maturity rate in each one of these layers? What progress do we need to make in order to enhance and protect ourselves from this? And then, of course, there's the balance, right? And, you can't just spend all your money on all the things in security and then, oops, we didn't actually operate the organization, right? So balancing that with your risk profile, starting to think about where those investments need to be and what's best for the use of your money. So, yeah,
Yep.
there's a lot to consider. There's a reason there's a CISO role, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Somebody's got to think through all this and keep it all on track. And so I think that's an important way to start to wrap this up, and I guess. But John, final
Yep.
thought.
The basics. I mean, I'll just go back to that. I mean, you mentioned the layers and understanding kind of where you're at. I think a lot of it just comes down to the basics. The basics still aren't covered. You think about the number one and number two of the top 10 security controls, which are still, hardware and software inventory. How many organizations still don't do those two?
Yeah.
To a mastery level extent, right? You may have some basic understanding of what's going on in the environment. Maybe you've got an EDR or something deployed, but that doesn't really give you the mastery level of that understanding. So how do you get to mastery? It's about 10,000 hours of the basics
That's
is
right.
mastery. So I think that's still a huge challenge and still a large part of this whole conversation and all these episodes and things that I'm sure we're going to do. Uh, that it's just those basics are not as easy as we think they are to really be good at them.
Yeah. Cool. Well, this is first episode of Security Bros and a fun topic to kick it off with. John, always fun to chat and looking forward to the next episode, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks, brother.